Great. Thanks everyone for joining. Just to introduce myself, I'm Joe, the Learning Development Consultant at Cornerstone Resources. Today we're going to look at third-party risk and respect at work and what employers should be reviewing now as a result of some of the changes that have come in. The aim is to keep this practical so you leave with a clear sense of what this means for you and where to focus on moving forward. You won't need to take loads of notes. We'll share the slides afterwards, and I've just clicked record, so we'll also send around a recording. So just feel free to engage with the content as you please and think about what it means for your organization as we go through. Like I say, I will be recording the main content, so I will share that round afterwards. And just to keep us to time, because it's a short session for 30 minutes, I'll cover the key content. And I'd really appreciate it if everyone could stay on mute just during the main presentation. I will ask the odd multiple choice question. It'd be great if you could answer those questions in the chat. But for the most part, if you could just stay on mute, there will be opportunity to send through questions, which I'll explain in a moment. So let's just get started and go through what we're going to cover today. We'll start by looking at why this matters now and what's actually changed. Then we'll look at where third-party risk shows up in practice. We'll clarify what reasonable steps mean, and then we'll focus on what you actually need to review in your organization and next steps for you as well. We'll finish by opening up for questions. Questions can be submitted via the QR code that you can see on screen. You'll see it at the bottom of this screen, you'll see it at the bottom of every slide. My colleague Heather, one of our HR consultants at Cornerstone, will aim to answer any questions at the end of the session. If we're unable to answer any of your questions or they need a bit more of an in-depth response, we'll take your name and email and come back to you following the session. So if you do post a question in there, if you could just put your name and email as well, that'll help us come back to you afterwards if we need to. Great. So before we go further, it's helpful to position where this sits because this is often where confusion comes in. Third-party risk isn't just about sexual harassment, it covers all forms of inappropriate behavior and harassment, particularly where that behavior comes from people outside your organization. So that could be customers, clients, contractors, service users, anyone your team interacts with. That said, there has been a particular focus recently on sexual harassment prevention. So this strengthened legal duty here is specifically around sexual harassment, but in practice, the same principles apply more broadly, really. Organizations are increasingly taking a consistent approach to all forms of inappropriate behavior, particularly where third parties are involved. So that's what we're doing today. We're zooming in on one part of that wider picture, how third party interactions fit into this overall approach to risk and behavior. It's also something we're supporting organizations with more and more at the moment, particularly alongside awareness sessions and manager focused training. So we'll touch on this at the end and to show how we can support you further through all of this. So why is this getting more attention now? What's really changed here is the expectation that's been placed on employers. Your duty of care now doesn't just stop at your employees, it extends to how third parties behave towards your workers. The legal duty is focused on workers, but in practice, this really does apply more broadly. Most organizations are also including people like volunteers and others in their into their thinking, because the risk and the impact doesn't really just stop at your employees, which I will touch on a bit throughout. Historically, many organizations have approached these situations in a fairly reactive way. So, in other words, something happens, someone raises it, and then the organization then responds. But the expectation has now moved away from simply reacting when something goes wrong and now thinking ahead about where risk could arise and what practical steps can be taken to reduce it. And then third, demonstrate as well. So this requires you to be able to show that reasonable steps were taken. This isn't just about intention now, it's about being able to show what you've done in practice. And alongside this, there is both a legal and organizational risk to think about too. So there's a potential for tribunal claims and increased compensation, particularly where an organization cannot show that they took those reasonable steps I just talked about. But for many organizations, the impact is wider than that. So there is also a reputational impact, how your organization is seen internally and externally if issues aren't handled well. And there is the impact on employee trust and retention, as you might expect. If staff feel that difficult behavior is tolerated, minimized, or just left unaddressed, that then starts to impact trust and it can drop very quickly. And then when trust drops, people disengage, they can start raising concerns, and in some cases, they might actually leave as well. So the expectation has shifted. This is about being more proactive, more intentional, and then being able to show your thinking a bit more too. So there is a legal dimension, as I've touched on, but there's also a very organizational dimension too. But before we go any further, I just want to do a quick sense check, really. Based on your current experience, where do you see the biggest third-party risk in your organization? So I've got four answers on screen. It'll all be different for everyone, so I expect to see some mixed answers here. We just look at this list. What's true for you, really? What's the biggest risk in your organization? Number one, customers and clients. Number two, contractors and suppliers. Number three, service users, the public. Number four, congregation. And number five, you're just not sure at this point in time. Give you a moment to put a number in the chat. One, two, three, four, or five. Great. So I can see a real mix coming through. What's useful to say here really is that it can vary quite a lot depending on the organization. Some will immediately think about customers, clients, service users, public, others about contractors and external partners, and for some it's actually quite a bit less clear. And that's quite common because these risks often sit across multiple areas, and I can see that some people have put multiple numbers in, which explains that too, rather than just one obvious place. And that's why it's worth stepping back and looking at it a bit more holistically. So let's look at this, what this actually means in practice beyond the legal side, because in reality, the impact often shows up in more subtle ways first. One of the biggest risks is that behavior becomes normalized over time. And then once that happens, it becomes much harder to address because it's no longer seen as unusual or unacceptable. Alongside that, employees can start to feel unsupported. If they experience something uncomfortable and nothing's said or done about it, that can have a real direct impact on trust, as I've said. From there, issues can then start to escalate. Something that could have been addressed early becomes more serious, and that's often when we start to see more formal complaints or grievances come through. And then broadly, there is that impact on retention and reputation. So good people leave environments when they don't feel respected or supported. And then what can also happen is word can spread internally or externally about what it's like to work there. So while the legal risk is important, what often happens first is that gradual shift in culture and confidence. And that's what organizations are really trying to get ahead of right now. So let's look at a typical example to make this practical. A regular customer makes repeated comments to a member of staff. They're framed as friendly or humorous, often described as just banter. The employee feels uncomfortable here but doesn't raise it, and as part of the reason for that is the uncertainty. They ask themselves, does this count as something worth reporting? And this is where a real key principle comes in. When behavior is repeated and unwanted, it's the impact that matters, not the intent behind it. Even if the person making the comments doesn't see an issue, the effect on the employee is what determines whether it becomes a problem when it comes to the law as well. And if that discomfort isn't addressed, it often builds over time. What starts as something small can then become something much more significant because if it happens repeatedly and nothing is changing. Another example, you might have someone on site who communicates in a very sort of what could be considered dismissive, abrupt, or disrespectful way. Then the response internally is often, they're not our employee. There's not much we can do about that. But this is where expectations have shifted. You're not expected to manage that person's employment, but you are expected to take responsibility for the environment your staff are working in. So if your employee is being affected by someone's behavior, there's still an expectation that you set clear standards, which we'll talk about more shortly, and respond appropriately. And again, if that doesn't happen, the message to your employees is that this behavior is acceptable, even if that's not the intention. And this is where it often becomes embedded. You might hear phrases like, you need to have a thick skin in this role, the clients are just difficult, that's how it is, it's always been like this here. And these are the phrases these phrases are important because they tell you something about the culture too. They show that behavior has been absorbed into the role itself and normalizes harmful behavior. Instead of being challenged, it's become something people are expected to tolerate. And then what then happens is two things usually follow. First, people stop recognizing their behavior as something that should be addressed. And then second, even if they do recognize it, they don't feel it's worth raising because they don't expect anything to change. So it's worth asking yourself, have you heard any of these phrases in your organization recently? I'm not asking you to share this with us, just have a think to yourself. And as we said earlier, many of these situations could also fall under sexual harassment depending on context, particularly where behavior is repeated, unwanted, or creates discomfort. So this isn't just a cultural issue, it can become a legal one as well. So let's make this practical and bring it together. Here's a scenario. I'd just like you to think about what you would do in this scenario. So a customer or congregation member makes repeated jokes to a member of staff. The staff member feels uncomfortable, but nothing has been raised formally. So the question is, what would you do first? Number one, address it immediately. Number two, wait for a formal complaint. Number three, speak to the employee only. Or four, again, just not sure. What do you think? Great, thanks for your answers. So what's interesting here is that it isn't always a single perfect answer, but what this highlights is the gap many organizations experience. They don't necessarily struggle with having a policy, most organizations do. They struggle with knowing what to do in the moment and feeling confident enough to act early. And this is often where small decisions make a big difference. Addressing something early, even informally, is usually far more effective than waiting for it to escalate into something formal. So this is really about moving from uncertainty and hesitation to confidence and early action. And that's a theme we'll come back to as we move into what reasonable steps you can take. So let's come to this idea because this is where most of the uncertainty tends to sit. It's worth really saying this clearly at the outset. There isn't actually a fixed, fully defined checklist at the moment from the guidance of what we can see or of what counts as reasonable steps at this stage. The expectation is clear, though, that organizations are expected to be proactive, but the exact detail of what reasonable looks like will continue to develop over time through guidance and case law. So, what I'm sharing here isn't a legal checklist, it's what we're seeing as good, proportionate practice in organizations right now. And when you break it down, it tends to come back to the four core areas. So, first is identify the risk. So, think about where your people interact with third parties and what could realistically go wrong in those situations. Second, setting clear expectations. So, making it clear what behavior is acceptable, not just internally, but externally as well. Thirdly, providing reporting routes so people know how and where to raise concerns, including where those concerns involve someone outside the organization. And then also acting on issues, so responding in a way that's timely, visible, and proportionate when something is raised. And one key point to really emphasize here is this is where organizations often rely on policy, but the expectation has moved towards behavior. That's probably the key takeaway from today. It's about what actually happens in practice, not just what exists on paper. But it's also just as important to be clear about what this doesn't mean, because this is where people can often start to feel overwhelmed. Because I realize we've gone through some things that are quite heavy, so it's worth me going through this too. First, it's not about perfection. You're not expected to eliminate all risk or guarantee that nothing will ever happen. That's not realistic, and it's not the standard that's being applied either. Second, it's not about creating lots of new policies or documentation. In fact, actually adding more paperwork without changing behavior often doesn't make any difference at all. And third, it's not about creating a zero risk environment too. So there will always be situations that are unpredictable or difficult to control. It's not perfection, not loads of policies, and not zero risk. It's proportionate action. That's probably the key word to take from today. What's considered reasonable will depend on the size of your organization, the nature of your work, and the level of exposure your staff have to third parties. So smaller organizations aren't expected to do what large organizations do. They're expected to do what's reasonable for them. So think of it as being able to actually honestly answer, we thought about it and here's what we did. We actually did something about it practically. So if you're thinking at this point, where do we actually start? These are the four areas we'd suggest focusing on first, starting with contracts and agreements. These are really simple but often overlooked place to set expectations. Most contracts focus on what someone is there to do, what they'll deliver, how the relationship works commercially, but they don't always say anything about behavior, and this is where a small addition can make a big difference. A short, clear expectation's enough. So something that makes it clear that respectful behavior is expected and that the standard apply when interacting with your staff. Now, it's important to say you don't necessarily need to share your full employee handbook with them. Some do, but there's other things you can do to make those expectations accessible in some form. It's about whether people can reasonably be expected to understand what's expected of them. And as you can see from the example on the slide, this can be as simple as a single sentence. So something like all individuals engaged by or on behalf of your organization are expected to adhere to our standards of conduct when interacting with our staff. Please refer to our code of conduct for further detail. Adding those simple comments can be really useful. Just that one sentence that really creates a really clear expectation too. You can adapt this for service agreements as well and contractor onboarding forms, volunteer agreements, or client welcome packs, whatever you tend to use or want to introduce. Doesn't have to be a code of conduct or employee handbook. There are different ways, but the clear thing is to really make that expectation clear with the people that you bring in. Next, codes of conduct. Many organizations do already have these in place, but the question to ask is, do they clearly extend to third-party interactions? Because if expectations only apply internally, you can end up with a gap when behavior comes from outside the organization. So there's three key areas to think about here. First, coverage. Does your code explicitly reference third parties where relevant? Second, visibility. A code of conduct only works if people have actually seen it. So how does it reach contractors, clients, and volunteers or others interacting with your organization? And then finally, practicality. Is it written in a way that people can actually understand and apply, or is it quite abstract? Clear, simple examples of what's expected is really useful here and what's not expected too. This is far more effective than broad general statements because, again, this is about behavior in real situations. Reporting routes are actually a real important area of all of this and often where the gaps sit. So making these routes clear will really build confidence across the board. Even small concerns matter because they help you spot patterns early, act early, and show your team that they're supported and that their experience at work matters. In many organizations, reporting processes technically exist, but without people actually reporting what's happening, organizations are often working in the dark, to be honest. They don't see what's happening until it becomes something more serious. But when it does come to third party behavior, people often aren't sure. Does this count? Is this something I can actually raise? And if there's uncertainty there, people are far less likely to speak up. So it's important to make it explicit that reporting routes apply to anyone who affects your staff, not just colleagues. And alongside that, there's the concept of psychological safety. People are much more likely to raise concerns if they believe something will be done and they won't be seen as the problem for raising it. So clarity and confidence in reporting are both critical here. It's worth asking yourself, really, if a member of your team experienced poor behavior from a client today, would they know where to go and would they feel confident doing so? That's something to really have a think about after the session. And finally, manager response. So managers are often the first point of contact when something happens. Their response really does change change everything. Good practice here is often quite simple. Address things early, support the employee first, and take appropriate action where needed. But in reality, this is often where organizations feel the biggest gap. Not because managers don't care, but because they're unsure, to be honest. What they should do, where they should go, how far they can go, or how they handle something that sits in what could be considered a grey area as well. So what you often see here is hesitation or delay or inconsistent responses across managers, and that can unintentionally send the message that the behavior is acceptable, even if that's not what was intended. So building manager confidence in the moment is a real key part of this, because early confident action is often what prevents situations from escalating. So all of this is about sense checking, really, what you already have in place, training your managers, and identifying where small adjustments could strengthen your position too. So just like to give you a short moment to reflect on your own organization, really. You might want to take a screenshot of this slide. I will send it through afterwards, like I said. There's no right or wrong answer to any of these questions, and I'm not asking you to share your answers with me either. This is about identifying what's most relevant for you. So it might be something you want to do after the session. What I would like you to think about though is where could this realistically happen in your organization? So think about your context, your culture. Would your team raise a concern? Do you honestly think they would sh raise a concern if they had one? Would your managers act confidently? So think about your gaps, those things I've been through, your contracts, your conduct expectations, reporting routes, manager confidence. Where is your weakest link? And really think about can you fill that gap as well? So I really encourage you to take some time after the session to think about these questions. There's no wrong answer, really. Anything you come up with will be useful for moving forward. Just look at next steps, and just I'd like to keep it simple, really. The first one is identify your risk, map out where your people interact with third parties, where issues are most likely to arise. Check expectations are clear externally. Do your contracts, onboarding materials, code of conducts, anything where you have behavior standards, are they really clear for your third parties? And third, test manager confidence as well. So if something happened today, would your managers know what to do and feel confident enough to act? You don't need to solve everything today. I hope that's not what I'm saying here or what's coming across. Even making one improvement in each of these areas is meaningful and demonstrable. It's a demonstrable step moving forward as well. And that's really the aim, really, to move away from awareness of this stuff into practical action. And just to let you know, really, we're also running sessions specifically focused on creating safe workplace and sexual harassment. This would be considered perhaps one of the reasonable steps I was talking about, showing that you're taking steps to prevent these things happening. So these sessions will include all staff sessions that you could join on an open basis, so with other organizations, manager and leader ones, so sessions that really focus on what managers and leaders need to do. And if you have a larger organization and you would like us to deliver just to your organization in a bespoke way and tailor into you, we can also do that. These are all available on our website right now. You can book onto these, or if you'd like a further chat, do email me afterwards. That's absolutely fine, as well. So thanks for listening. What I will do now is just go to question time and just hand over to Heather. Have we had any questions, Hannah? Heather, sorry, come through?
Yeah, so I'm just putting one in. So we've had a question, mainly deal with delivery drivers who are not attached to our suppliers or contractors. How can you provide them with written policies to them? So my answer is wherever they are based, I would share the sexual harassment policy. If you do have drivers coming in from different companies, you can also have an agreement with them. Um, if they are just coming in, the best thing is to have something in the reception area, with a notice around sexual harassment.
Great. Thanks, Heather. Are there any more?
No, just
Great.
that one for now.
Thanks. Thank you. Thanks for that. If anyone has any further questions, do speak to your consultant if you're one of our clients after the session, or feel free to send through questions to myself and I can get you an answer, even if it needs a bit more of an in-depth thought too. But yeah, thank you everyone for joining. If you are able just to stay on for a couple of minutes, I'd really appreciate feedback on this session, just to know if it's what you were hoping to get, if it was helpful, if there's anything that could be improved as well, just for the future sessions that we run. Do feel free to go to the link on screen or scan the QR code. But yeah, thanks everyone for your time. Thanks for joining. I look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you.